Steve Harvey was reading a Family Feud question when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence, dropped his question cards, and pointed directly at someone in the audience. What he said next wasn't just television history. It was a moment that would force America to confront something it had been ignoring for decades. The date was October 17th, 2019, and what happened in those next 8 minutes would never be allowed on TV again. It was a Thursday afternoon at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta. The air conditioning hummed softly as two families stood on opposite sides of the stage. On the left was the Patterson family from Birmingham, Alabama. 5 African-American family members ranging from grandmother Dorothy, 68, to grandson Marcus, 19th. On the right stood the Fletcher family from suburban Nashville. 5 white family members led by patriarch Robert Fletcher, 52, a successful car dealership owner. The game had been going smoothly for 40 minutes. Both families were tied at 2 rounds each, and the energy in the studio was electric. Steve Harvey, dressed in his signature purple suit with a pocket square that matched his tie, was doing what he did best, making everyone laugh while keeping the game moving. "All right," Steve said, adjusting his glasses and looking at his cards. Asked 100 people. Name something you'd be embarrassed to do in front of your in-laws. Marcus Patterson hit the buzzer first. Burp, Steve. The board lit up. Burp. Number 3, answer, Steve announced as the audience applauded. The Patterson family chose to play. Everything seemed normal, standard Family Feud energy. But in the audience, something was brewing. Robert Fletcher Jr., the 24-year-old son of the Fletcher family patriarch, was sitting in the front row with his girlfriend. He had been drinking before the show, not drunk, but buzzed enough to have loosened his filter. As Marcus gave his answer and celebrated with his family, Robert leaned over to his girlfriend and said something. The comment was caught by one of the wireless audience microphones, a hot mic that fed directly into the control room. It wasn't broadcast to the studio speakers, but Steve's earpiece picked it up clearly. What Robert said was a racial slur followed by, "Of course they'd know about being embarrassing." Steve froze mid-step. His smile disappeared. He touched his earpiece as if to confirm what he had just heard. The stage manager noticed immediately. Steve's body language had completely changed. "Steve," the stage manager said through the earpiece. "You okay?" Steve didn't respond. He was scanning the audience, trying to pinpoint where the comment had come from. His eyes landed on Robert Fletcher Jr., who was laughing with his girlfriend, completely unaware that his words had been heard. The Patterson family was still celebrating their answer, but Steve wasn't with them anymore. He stood at center stage, cards in his hand, his jaw tight. "Cut to commercial," the director said in the control room. "Something's wrong." But before the stage manager could signal the cut, Steve spoke. "Hold up," Steve said, his voice low but firm. The laughter in the studio began to fade. "Hold up, stop." The families looked confused. The audience went quiet. This wasn't part of the show. Steve slowly placed his question cards on his podium. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he looked back up, his expression was something the crew had never seen before. Not angry, not sad, but deeply, profoundly disappointed. "We're going to stop the game for a minute," Steve said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Somebody in this audience just said something that I can't let slide." The control room erupted into chaos. Producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or keep rolling. Executive producer Marcus Freeman made the call. "Keep cameras rolling. Whatever Steve's doing, we capture it." Steve walked to the edge of the stage, looking directly into the audience section where Robert sat. Robert's smile was fading now. He was starting to realize. "I've been doing this show for years," Steve said. "And one thing I've always believed is that this stage, this game, it's a place where families come together. Black families, white families, Hispanic families, Asian families, it doesn't matter. We come here, we laugh, we compete, and we celebrate each other." The studio was dead silent. Even the crew members had stopped moving. "But somebody in this room just said something that reminds me we still got a long way to go." Steve's voice cracked slightly. "And I got to address it. Not because I want to, but because if I don't, I'm just another person pretending it didn't happen." Steve pointed toward Robert's section. "Young man in the front row with the girlfriend, stand up." Robert Fletcher Jr.'s face went pale. His girlfriend grabbed his arm, but Steve was unwavering. "Stand up," Steve repeated. "I'm not going to hurt you, but you're going to face what you said." Slowly, reluctantly, Robert stood. The camera operators instinctively turned their cameras toward him. Robert's father, still on stage, looked horrified. "You said something when Marcus gave his answer," Steve said. "You used a word that has no place anywhere, but especially not in this building. And then you made a joke about his family being embarrassing." Robert stammered. "I didn't mean it was just a joke, man. I wasn't a joke." Steve's voice rose slightly. "Let me tell you something about jokes, young man. Jokes are supposed to bring people together. Jokes are supposed to make us laugh at situations, not at people. What you said wasn't a joke. It was hate disguised as humor." The Patterson family stood frozen on their side of the stage. Marcus, the young man who'd been insulted, had tears in his eyes. His grandmother, Dorothy, held his hand tightly. Steve took a deep breath, composing himself. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but more powerful. "You know what the sad part is? You probably don't even think you're racist. You probably got black friends. You probably listen to hip-hop. You probably think because you're young and cool that you get a pass." Steve shook his head. "But that word you used, that word was created to dehumanize people. It was used while people were being beaten, while they were being lynched, while they were being told they couldn't drink from the same water fountain as you." Robert's girlfriend had tears streaming down her face. Robert himself looked like he wanted to disappear. "Now I could embarrass you," Steve continued. "I could have security throw you out. I could make you the villain of this story." He paused. "But that's not what I'm going to do." The control room was on the edge of their seats. Where was Steve going with this? "Instead, I'm going to ask you a question," Steve said, "and I want you to answer honestly. Do you understand why what you said was wrong?" Robert nodded quickly. "Yes. Yes, I'm sorry. I really am." "Are you sorry you said it?" Steve asked. "Or are you sorry you got caught?" The question hung in the air. Robert struggled to answer. Robert's voice cracked. "I think I'm sorry I said it. But honestly, Mr. Harvey, I don't know if I would have thought about it if you hadn't called me out." It was the most honest answer anyone expected. Steve nodded slowly. "At least you're being real now," Steve said. "That's a start." Steve turned to face the cameras directly. "I want to talk to everyone watching at home. I want to talk to the young people especially. We live in a time where people think they can say anything because they're behind a screen or in a crowd or with their friends. But words matter. Words have power. Words have history." He gestured to the Patterson family. "These folks came here today to play a game and maybe win some money. They didn't come here to be reminded that there are still people in this world who see them as less than human." Dorothy Patterson, the grandmother, spoke up. "Mr. Harvey, can I say something?" Steve nodded. "Of course, ma'am." Dorothy walked to center stage. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with immense dignity. She looked at Robert, then at Steve, then at the cameras. "I'm 68 years old," she said, her voice steady. "I grew up in Birmingham during segregation. I've been called that word more times than I can count. I've had doors slammed in my face. I've had my children cry because they couldn't understand why they were treated different." She paused, gathering her emotions. "But you know what? I don't hate him." She pointed at Robert. "I don't hate that young man because hate is what got us here in the first place." The entire studio was in tears now. Camera operators, producers, the other family on stage. Dorothy continued. "What I want is for him to understand. I want him to know that my grandson Marcus," she put her arm around Marcus, "is a college student. He volunteers at a homeless shelter. He wants to be a teacher and he deserves to be seen for who he is, not reduced to a slur." Steve's face was wet with tears. He walked over to Dorothy and hugged her. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for being bigger than this moment." Steve turned back to Robert. "You hear that, young man? That's grace. That's what it looks like when someone chooses to educate instead of retaliate." Robert was openly crying now. "I'm so sorry," he said to the Patterson family. "I'm so sorry." Marcus, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Do you mean it?" "Yes," Robert said. "I mean it. I was raised better than this. I got caught up in trying to be funny and I wasn't thinking." "Then do better," Marcus said simply. "That's all we're asking. Just do better." Steve let the moment breathe. Then he made a decision. "Here's what we're going to do," Steve announced. "Robert, you're going to sit back down and watch the rest of this game. You're going to watch these two families compete with respect and love. And then after the show, you're going to spend an hour with the Patterson family. You're going to listen to their stories. You're going to learn. He turned to the Fletcher family on stage. And to the Fletcher family, I know this ain't your fault. You're not responsible for what your family member said, but I hope you'll support this young man in growing from this. Robert Fletcher Sr., the father, stepped forward. Mr. Harvey, I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed that my son would say something like that. We will absolutely support whatever you think needs to happen. Good, Steve said, because this is how change happens. Not by canceling people, not by just yelling at each other, but by facing the ugly truth and doing the hard work to be better. Steve picked up his cards again. He put his glasses back on. His composure was slowly returning. Now he said, "We're going to finish this game, but I want everyone in this studio and watching at home to remember something. Family Feud is about family, and the truth is we're all family, all of us. And families have hard conversations. Families call each other out when they're wrong, but families also forgive and grow together." He looked at both families. "Y'all ready to finish this?" Patterson family nodded, still emotional but appreciative. The Fletcher family nodded as well, humbled and subdued. "All right then," Steve said, "let's play Family Feud." The game resumed, but it was different now. The laughter was more careful, the competition was respectful. When the Patterson family won, the Fletcher family applauded genuinely. When it was over, Robert Jr. approached Marcus and extended his hand. "I meant what I said," Robert told him. "I'm sorry and I want to learn." Marcus shook his hand. "Then let's talk." The episode that aired 3 weeks later was unlike anything in game show history. The network debated heavily about whether to broadcast Steve's confrontation, but ultimately decided America needed to see it. They added a content warning at the beginning and a resource list at the end for viewers who wanted to learn more about combating racism. The response was explosive. Some praised Steve for using his platform to address racism head-on. Others criticized him for making the show political, but the overwhelming majority of responses were supportive. Veterans of the civil rights movement wrote letters to Steve. Teachers showed the clip in classrooms. The Patterson family received thousands of messages of support. And Robert Fletcher Jr. He did spend that hour with the Patterson family. It turned into 3 hours. Then it turned into ongoing conversations. 6 months later, Robert enrolled in African American history courses at his local community college. He began volunteering with Dorothy at community events focused on racial healing. Was he perfect? Number. Did he still make mistakes? Yes, but he was trying, he was learning, he was growing. That's what that October day taught everyone who witnessed it. That change is possible, but only when people are willing to be uncomfortable, to be called out, and to do the work. Steve Harvey kept that episode's cards in his office. On the back of one, he wrote a note. "The day we chose truth over entertainment, because that's what it was. It wasn't about ratings or viral moments. It was about a man who had a platform and chose to use it for something bigger than himself." Years later, Steve was asked in an interview whether he regretted stopping the show that day. His answer was immediate. "Not for a second. If I had kept going with the game and pretended I didn't hear what I heard, I couldn't have looked at myself in the mirror. Some moments demand a response." That was one of them. The interviewer asked if he thought it changed anything. Steve smiled. "I know it changed something, because Robert's not the same person he was. The Patterson family got to share their truth, and millions of people watching had to confront something uncomfortable. That's how change starts. One uncomfortable conversation at a time." Family Feud went on to implement sensitivity training for all audience members. They created partnerships with organizations focused on racial justice. They ensured that the diverse families appearing on the show were celebrated, not just tolerated. But more than any policy change, what mattered was the message sent that October day. That some things are more important than entertainment. That dignity is non-negotiable. That every person, regardless of their skin color, deserves to be seen as fully human. Steve Harvey stopped a game show, but what he really stopped was the silence that allows hate to flourish. And in doing so, he reminded America that heroes aren't always soldiers or activists. Sometimes they're game show hosts who refuse to let ignorance go unchallenged. The moment lasted 8 minutes. The impact will last forever.